Dr. McCarthy, anyway, some people might also want to know about the story behind format. So, what makes you come up with something, a new formula? Let's say you invented something instead of just following the path. What's the story behind this? Why?
Halo para sahabat sekalian dimanapun Anda berada. Kembali berjumpa di YouTube channel Alguskha Nalendra di playlist baru kali ini. Yes, sebagaimana Anda bisa melihat dari judul playlist ini, Interview and Podcast. Di playlist inilah saya dengan sengaja menghadirkan berbagai narasumber untuk kemudian kita wawancara, kita mintai sudut pandangnya tentang berbagai pemahaman dan kebijaksanaan yang otentik dalam diri mereka untuk dibagikan pada para penonton di YouTube channel ini. Di episode ke-1 ini, salah seorang narasumber yang saya hadirkan adalah seorang tokoh yang sangat saya kagumi di bidang pendidikan dan pembelajaran, yaitu Dr. Bernice McCarthy. Bagi Anda yang belum familiar, Dr. McCarthy adalah sosok di belakang format system. Nah, kali ini mereka yang bergerak di bidang pelatihan dan pembelajaran mungkin lebih familiar ketika mendengarnya. Hal ini karena format system menjadi salah satu kerangka dalam mendesain pembelajaran yang populer digunakan di banyak organisasi dan institusi pembelajaran di berbagai penjuru dunia. Dalam format system, kita belajar sebuah pembelajaran disampaikan hendaknya dengan menjawab 4 pertanyaan penting, yaitu why, what, how, dan what if. Sederhananya begini, ketika sebuah pembelajaran difasilitasi dalam sudut pandang format system, hendaknya sebuah pertanyaan penting terjawab dalam diri para pembelajarnya, kenapa atau why saya perlu mempelajari yang akan disampaikan di pembelajaran kali ini. Setelah mereka mendapatkan rasa penting bahwa saya harus mempelajari yang akan disampaikan kali ini, barulah pembelajaran ini menjawab pertanyaan apa saja dasar pemahaman yang membentuk proses pembelajaran yang sedang dilakukan kali ini. Berikutnya yaitu how atau bagaimana. Bagaimana yang sudah dipelajari di pembelajaran ini bisa menjadi sebuah manfaat nyata yang diaplikasikan dalam kehidupan sehari-hari. Artinya, apa yang dipelajari ini hendaknya tidak hanya bagus atau terdengar penuh konsep di kelas, tetapi sulit untuk dilakukan di dalam kehidupan nyata. Disinilah pertanyaan bagaimana hendaknya menjawab kegelisahan ini. Baru yang terakhir, pertanyaan yang hendaknya dijawab adalah what if, atau bagaimana jika yang sudah dipahami, dipraktekkan ini kemudian divariasikan ke berbagai konteks lainnya. Dengan kata lain, ada unsur adaptasi di dalam apa yang sudah kita pelajari ini menjadikannya bernilai untuk kita pribadi. Format system sendiri menjadi sebuah topik yang di beberapa kesempatan di Indonesia ada kalanya disuarakan di forum-forum pembelajaran. Berbagai bahasan seputar 4 pertanyaan pembelajaran tadi sering menjadi topik diskusi di berbagai forum pembelajaran. Yang tidak banyak orang ketahui adalah di balik keempat pertanyaan pembelajaran tadi, sebetulnya tersimpan pemahaman yang jauh lebih mendalam di balik format sistem ini. 4 pertanyaan itu sebetulnya nanti menjadi pintu untuk kita mempelajari lebih jauh seluk-beluk format sistem ini yang terbagi menjadi 4 gaya belajar, 8 siklus pembelajaran, dan banyak lagi ragam materi yang menarik lainnya. Saya pertama kali berkenalan dengan format sistem ini 10 tahun lalu, dan sejak saat itu format sistem ini telah menjadi bagian tidak terpisahkan dari rutinitas saya mendesain pembelajaran bagi para peserta pelatihan yang saya adakan. Puji syukur, pada tahun 2023 saya berkesempatan untuk mendalami format ini secara lebih intensif bersama Dr. McCarthy sampai kemudian menjadi trainer pertama di format sistem ini di Indonesia dan Asia Tenggara. Banyak topik diskusi menarik yang saya lalui bersama Dr. McCarthy. Ada banyak sekali pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang terjawab dari diskusi bersamanya. Ada berbagai sudut pandang yang mendalam tentang kehidupan, bukan hanya tentang pembelajaran yang beliau bagikan di sesi interaksi yang kami lalui. Sampai kemudian saya bertanya, saya meminta kesediaan beliau untuk membagikan penemuan dan pemikirannya secara lebih formal di interview podcast. Puji syukur beliau bersedia. Maka sebentar lagi kita akan menyimak sekilas pembicaraan saya dengan Dr. McCarthy di interview podcast saya bersama beliau. Dalam podcast ini Anda akan melihat bagaimana beliau masih sedemikian energik dan bersemangat membagikan berbagai pemikirannya seputar pembelajaran. Anda juga mungkin nanti akan melihat beberapa bahasan yang bersifat teknis atau konseptual yang memang diadaptasi dari format sistem, terutama ketika beliau membicarakan kemampuan mengkonseptualisasikan sebuah pembelajaran. Untuk saat ini, mari kita simak saja dulu apapun yang beliau sampaikan, terutama berbagai pesan moral sehubungan dengan peran kita sebagai seseorang yang mendesain dan memfasilitasi proses pembelajaran. Sedikit catatan, sebagaimana Anda mungkin sudah mengira-ngiranya, interview podcast ini dilakukan dalam bahasa Inggris. Untuk saat ini, video ini diunggah apa adanya, sesuai dengan sebagaimana interview ini dilakukan. Kita akan lihat apakah nantinya diperlukan untuk mengunggah video tersendiri yang berisikan terjemahan dari percakapan di podcast ini. Seandainya itu diperlukan, silahkan Anda ikut memberikan permintaan Anda di kolom komentar. Untuk saat ini, mari nikmati saja dulu interview podcast saya bersama Dr. McCarthy apa adanya.
Hi, hello everyone. Welcome to the interview and podcast in my YouTube channel, Alguskha Nalendra, aka Alka. And for today, we have an honor to welcome Dr. McCarthy, Dr. Bernice McCarthy. She is the founder and creator of the format system. And today, we're going to have a great session with her. So let's get into it. So, Dr. McCarthy, welcome. And it's such an honor for me to have you here. And first, before we begin the podcast, I'd like to extend my gratitude. Thanks for format system. It really helps me a lot in designing the course and designing the training. So in my corporate training business, it really, how to say, I mean, it really makes it easier for me to design everything. And the participants really love it. They really love the learning process with format, how they can be engaged actively in the learning process. So it's because of you. Thanks for that. So right here, we have mostly our audience will be in Indonesia. And if I can tell you a little bit about format and you as the creator of format system, in Indonesia, in some learning forum, we have some topics that cover about why, what, how, and what if. And at the end, that topic will be addressed as a format system, and they will mention about you as the creator of format system. But again, there will be some questions about it. Some people have questions like, how is Dr. McCarthy? Is she still around? What is she up to now? So to have an answer to that questions, can you explain about your activity now? What is it that you are busy with? What are you working on? To let the audience know that you are still there, you are still active in this field. So what is it, Dr. McCarthy?
That's a great question. Am I still around? Yes, yes. This is exciting. I'm working on a new little introductory 3-hour workshop to compare format and the way you go through that cycle with consciousness. Consciousness is so subjective that scientists have never been able to get a handle on it because it is so totally subjective. But lately, they're really starting to move in on it, and there's some wonderful new work that's out. As a matter of fact, just before you clicked in with me, I went downstairs to my front door because a new book has just arrived that is dated 2024 on how matter became conscious and alive, which I will, of course, read eagerly. What I found is the work of Damasio talks
Mm,
about how, listen to this quote, feelings are the inaugural event in the great story of consciousness.
mm,
So he goes back over how early humans began by sensing, well, just picture it, the Neanderthals, the sapiens sensing, and then the sensing, I picture in my mind uh, sniffing a bush or something for some food, and then noticing it and tasting it, and then remembering what it looked like and where it was, and so on, way back at the beginning. So he talks about that, how sensing begins and then goes to something he calls minding, which requires creating images in your mind,
mm.
right? And then, which are the critical components of going down to intelligence. So I'm looking at this and reading this and seeing format coming right around. So
Right.
I've been working on it and I'm excited. I called my compatriot in Korea who does a lot of the work, the design work of the things I create, and tried it on him. And he was very excited. And before I leave it, and we can go back to talking about format, Damasio ends up by saying, I like to imagine three distinct and evolutionary stages. The first one is being, the second
Mm,
one moves to feeling, and the
mm.
third one is the beginning of knowing.
Right. It sounds like a really
Isn't
format.
that's really exciting.
Hmm.
I ran this off because I'm still working on it because I want to read those quotes to you today. So that's what I'm working on now. And that will
Right.
appear on format.org, I hope, along with
Hmm.
your name and your material.
Hmm.
So Tim is excited about it too. But
Right.
that's what I'm doing now, and I'm
Hmm.
still very active. I still work full time and love it. I can't imagine,
Yeah.
honestly, uh,
Oh,
I can't
wow.
imagine not doing this work.
Wow, it sounds to me that it's not only you are active, but you are evolving a lot. I mean, it's like from learning to consciousness. It's really
Yeah,
huge topic. And the most amazing things I heard is how in the consciousness field that you had, it really sounds like a format. The way you explains about being, feeling, and knowing, when I heard it as someone who learn and teach format, I just thought it really sounds like a format. So uh,
yeah.
format has encapsulated the formula of the consciousness. That's really interesting topic. So Dr. McCarthy, anyway, some people might also want to know about the story behind format. I mean, as a teacher, well, you were a teacher and you are still teacher now. So what makes you come up with something, a new formula? Let's say you invented something instead of just following the path because even before format existed, well, the teaching has been there. Some people has already started, some people, I mean, mostly the teacher and trainer has had their own way of teaching. So, what makes you contribute to this field by let's say formulating format? What's the story behind this? Why?
Well, there were really two things that happened. One was that
Mhm.
everyone always hears me talk about was my five sons were all
Mm,
equally intelligent and all so unbelievably different. And the first one, straight A student,
mhm.
always with the books and so on. The last one decided by the time he was six, he never wanted to go back to school again, right?
Oh,
And they were so different and so equally intelligent. And how could they be so different and still be doing and thinking the way they do and the way they are? And today, the oldest one is a college professor with a PhD, and the
hmm.
youngest one is a musician and a
Musician.
fabulous web designer for
Mm.
a university system.
Mhm.
So all the others in between all equally. So that was the first thing was, wow, why are they so different? And then Alco, I was teaching always. I actually hired someone to stay with us in our house for the whole week. And I paid her my salary. In
Mhm.
other words, we couldn't afford to have a full-time housekeeper, but I could go to work and do what I love teaching. And I just turned my salary over to her, and it was a lovely arrangement. And when she came to me, she said she really didn't know how to read. And could I teach her to read? Because she wanted to read the Bible. And of course, that was very easy for me to do. And so we had this lovely arrangement. So I was able to teach all different manners because my husband was transferred 8 times in those opening years. And I always would end up in a superintendent's office in October or November when they desperately were missing one teacher. So I went from one teaching job to another.
Mhm.
And then I ended up in high school, which is what I love the most, working with 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And it was a marvelous high school. And the decision was made at that high school that we would offer 4 different ways of teaching to the students coming in for them to choose. Which would they like? One of them was going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of small group. Another was going to be straight academic, just what they've been used to with all the lecturing. There was a
Mhm.
fourth one that was going to be more creative minded. And
Mhm.
I ended up the principal of that group, that fourth group,
Mm.
which of course I'm a quadrant 4 person too, so it was no surprise that I ended up with that. And
Mhm.
that program went on for several years. And it was that program that I worked on and took with me into Northwestern University in Chicago, and then began thinking more seriously about those differences and found David Kolb's work, where he had actually described those 4 qualities that travel this learning cycle. And so it was a combination of my own family and the work in my teaching and getting to David Cole and finding him that led to my sitting down. I could tell you the room I was in, the color of the wallpaper. I remember so
Mm.
clearly sitting down and looking at that cycle and saying, my Lord, we never teach the top half of it. We need to teach all of it. And then I began to write. And that was the beginning of format.
Wow, it really has a deep personal story behind it, and the way I see it is it has an essence of appreciating the difference, appreciating the difference on how people learn. So if let's say we move on to the next question, what will be learning for you if somebody asks you like, Bernice, what is learning for you as a teacher? And let's say I'm a layperson, I'm just common person who doesn't really know about learning. How would you define learning for me? How would you explain that?
Yeah. Well, the real secret and the real trick was coming up with those 4 questions.
Mm.
And when it was why, what, how, and if, it just flowed right through that cycle. And the why question was everything.
Mm.
And even today, Alco, I would say the same thing. The why question. And here we have a man saying in his new book, the fundamental step to consciousness is feeling. And so it was feeling. And
Mm.
it was that cycle with the 12 o'clock place, the top half of the cycle. The feeling was scary to a lot of professionals,
Mm.
good teachers who I knew who thought, well, it's so many different ways that that could be tackled because there are so many different students whose feelings are coming into this class, right? So I would say, no, we need to come up with something that's the core of what you want to teach. Your hardcore content that you
Mm-hmm.
need to understand, you have to come up with the core of that and
Mm-hmm.
then come up with the why for them, for the students. And
Mm.
that was the part that when I began teaching this way, people said, I'm not sure I know how to do that. Feelings have always been so personal and
Mm-hmm.
so um, um, frightening in a
Uh-huh.
way to people that maybe the way they feel isn't right, isn't. So there's always that nervousness about, am I good enough to really know the
Mm.
answer to this and so on. And so I took that beginning learning idea to a small 20-minute overview of the cycle. And
Mm-hmm.
I put the 4 questions in and how the different learning styles came up with that. And
Mm-hmm.
then I was asked to speak at a very important education conference for K-12. And I was given a little room with 15 people. It could
Mm-hmm.
fit 15 people in it. And I began and stood there very nervously and began showing this cycle and
Mm-hmm.
these 4 questions and how the why was so critical and how the difficulty was in knowing how to produce the why from the content. So
Mm-hmm.
that meant that you had to conceptualize your content and then come up with a way that it would engage everyone. And I did my short half hour, first time ever explanation of format to a room full, tiny little room with about 15 people in it. And as soon as I finished, I was swamped. People came right up to me and said, "Oh, this is," and then in one of the people who came up was the second head of the organization that was running the conference.
Oh,
And he
wow.
came up to me and said, Dr. McCarthy, and we later became great friends, Dr. McCarthy, could you teach this again today in a different setting if I get you another room? And I said, sure. You mean repeat what yes, just repeat what you just did. So honestly, Alco, he said, I'll get back to you and tell you where the room is. It was a big hotel, right?
Oh.
He gets back to me very shortly afterwards and he says, we want you to be in the ballroom.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I assumed they just, were doing this at the last minute. So they
Mm-hmm.
had walled off a small part of the floor. And I said, fine. And he
Uh-huh.
said, it's 12:30 if you'd be there at 12:30. So I said, oh, yeah, I'm really excited, right? And I had Michael with me and a couple of other people that I was
Mm-hmm.
working with. When I got to the ballroom, it was the ballroom and it was full.
Oh, wow. From 15 to full
500, there were
ballroom.
500 people in the room.
All right.
And I remember standing up and thinking, what am I doing here? And I just did the same presentation,
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, 4, why, what, how, if. And the real trick is knowing the concept and being able to come up with the experience at the beginning. And that did it. That launched my company
Uh-huh.
format. I had like 20 staff a month later and a great big room, a great
Mm-hmm.
big building. And that was the beginning of it. And it was the way, the simplicity of the why, what, how, if became
Uh-huh.
the real key to it. And of course, over the time that's passed, I've done a lot of work with each of those words,
Mm-hmm.
works, and most of all dealt with the difficulty in presenting it so that
Yes.
it's simple, down to earth language
Mm-hmm.
for a really big idea,
Mm-hmm.
actually, a really big idea. And of course, then I began and wrote the learning style inventory,
Mm-hmm.
and that went out, and that went to the right and left mode. And then I called together some of the people who were working in the brain, and they worked and met with me and talked about the right and left mode ways to go through those 4 questions: why, what, how, if. That's really
Mm.
how it all began. I became absolutely convinced then, before I'd ever looked at the brain work of Damasio that I just
Mm-hmm.
described to you earlier, that this was what learning was.
Okay.
That it had to go, it had to hit me that there was a value in it for me in order for me to want to know it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, all the good students will sit there and listen to the lectures and write everything down and do it, but it doesn't often get into their heart, their feeling place, where the value
Mm-hmm.
is something that becomes part of them, which is what learning has to do. It has to become part of people. Any of the
Right.
trainings that you do, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure the people who come to your trainings, when they begin using and valuing what you taught them, and you find it goes into their own work and
Right.
it becomes something they have created from what you taught them,
Mm-hmm.
far beyond what you could have thought of for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it leaves the teacher, goes into the learner, and stays there and becomes something better. So all the way through this, our understandings of how to teach and how to learn and how to train and how to take our training into the workplace has just grown and grown and grown and grown. So really, if you were to say to me, what has format meant to you personally, Bernice, I would say it always is more. Like
Right.
me
Yes.
going through this new material on
Mm-hmm.
consciousness, it's just more. And I can see where I get that figured out, then there's going to be more. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine stop doing this that I could.
Right, I agree with that. The way I see it is when I practice format, when I design the course based on format, I agree that there's always something more. And it clarifies the things even deeper when I found my own senses in the way using the format. And as if I have something in my mind saying, oh, this is what she means. Oh, this is what Dr. McCarthy means by doing this, by having this in the cycle. And that's great. So, Dr. McCarthy, if let's say some people comes to you and they are really, let's say, not really familiar with format, and let's say they are from Indonesia just like me, and they ask you in the really common questions, Dr. McCarthy, how format will help us designing the course? I mean, what the difference will it make to our way of teaching? Let's say the people comes from many sector. Some people might come from training business. Some people might come from education. They are a teacher, and they have one questions in their mind. How format will help us to be a better teacher, trainer, or learning designer? How would you explain that?
But it's learning itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's the act of learning itself begins always with a learner seeing a value
Mm-hmm.
in what is about to be done. And when the value can be in the feeling place,
Mm-hmm.
and people think feeling is just this, oh, this soft little thing in your heart. No, feeling is your whole self, your whole
Mm-hmm.
self. um, think of something that you did in your life that absolutely affected you so strongly. It was all of you. It wasn't just this little soft heart thing that people think feeling it. It was
Mm-hmm.
all of you. And of course, now all this work I'm reading and studying, they're talking about feeling that way. So that if you can have your people that you train, so
Mm-hmm.
let's your case, for example, who come to your workshops, if they can see right up front as they begin that very first session that you start, they see this great value
Mm-hmm.
for them in their work in their life, then they take it out into their work. See, so what I have learned lately and didn't understand back then, I've learned that format is a design for
Mm-hmm.
designing. It
Oh.
isn't, it isn't just a way to learn something, it's how to design learning for a learning.
Oh, right.
So that if you take a format course and you find out how to do format and you find out you're a one,
Mm-hmm.
two, three, or four, all
Uh-huh.
of that. So if you run format courses where people can come and find that, they will take it back and find themselves using the design method
Uh-huh.
in all of their work. See,
Right.
so I didn't realize that I didn't really understand that it was a design for designing. I was really always thinking it was a way to teach. And then when Carnegie Mellon, which is a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful engineering university in Pittsburgh in the US, decided to run a new graduate program in designing. And they were talking about designing programs for communities, a program for the homeless, a way to get them fed
Mm.
regularly, right? Even though they insist on constantly staying out there on the street, which
Mm-hmm.
some of them actually do. How can we get them fed and so on? It was, or a community that needed a different way for the transportation system to work and so on. So Carnegie Mellon introduced this graduate program in
Mm-hmm.
training for design and decided to use format to do it.
Oh,
And
okay.
out came a little article in the Medium, which is an online magazine called Medium, about what happened when they used format to designing.
Mm-hmm.
And when it did, I began to realize how important format was, not only for teaching, but for designing as well,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can give people who come to your workshops to learn it, you give them a great gift because they can then redesign what they have already been doing in their lives or their work so that they cover why, what, how, and if. I mean,
Right.
to imagine that I would have been called by the United States Navy, the United States Army to go and teach them what this design was, and to think that and I wrote it for K-12.
Mm-hmm.
The first big order, the first big contact we had is IKEA. And
Mm-hmm.
then it went from there into the corporate world and so on, where you live, of course. And then it attracted you. So it will do that for them, whoever your people are who come to your training. It's learning is always more. There's always more. I actually use the Mobius strip in some of my workshops, which
Mm-hmm.
is that incredible um, piece that where you can make a Mobius strip very easily by cutting a piece of paper in a long, skinny,
Mm-hmm.
and attaching with one turn the two ends together, right? And then
Right.
having people discover that it's all one piece, even after they cut it in half. They have to
Mm-hmm.
cut it in half, thinking there'll be two circles, and they find out it's still the same one circle. And mathematicians are still trying to figure out how the Mobius thing works. But to me, it was a symbol of there was always more. And so
Mm-hmm.
I always had trouble at the beginning because people would say, Bernice, where's the assessment piece to format?
Right.
And I finally realized I had to sit down and do that. And the reason I had trouble with it was because of that reason. Whenever you learn something well, you need to know more. It opens
Mm-hmm.
another whole place. So
Mm-hmm.
when does the assessment stop? In other words, I say to high school teachers who teach literature, after your students graduate from your high school, do you ever go to find out, are they still reading literature? Do you, that's the real assessment, isn't it?
Right.
Not the test they passed to get their grade in your school.
Mm-hmm.
It's what they did with it when they left.
Yeah. Yes.
And
Oh,
so that's
it's
what learning is. Learning is always more. And I think
more.
it's it's almost religious in that way. There's
Mhm.
always more. There's always more.
It's it's really a short statement like there's always more, but it has really deep meaning to it. And the way I see it is what you say, it was correct, that format really helps us, me personally as a trainer, to build value and what I deliver to the audience. And what happened is it gives me a really solid foundation to conceptualize and personalize the content for them. And what you said was correct, that the benefit is of a training is the way we see it after the training, not during the training. And when the participants come back to me and say like, oh, Alka, I had this in my work, and what you said was correct. The way I did it is like this and that. And to hear their story, that they applied what they have learned in the class, is really magnificent gift, and the way they express their gratitude. And I guess I'm not saying I guess, but I will say it won't happen without format in my career. So once again, thanks for that. So Dr. McCarthy, anyway, if people ask like, what if we want to know about format? How do we find more information about it? And because some people may ask, okay, we heard about format and we'd like to know more about the official information about format from Dr. McCarthy, since there are many people who spreading information about format in their own blogs or own website, and some people might be wondering about, so where is the actual information about format? So where can we get the official information from you, from about learning? I mean, from Format International. Where can we get it?
Well, we have format.org,
Mm-hmm.
format.org, and format is a number, and
Mm-hmm.
then MAT, format.org, which is the major worldwide website that
Mm-hmm.
has the opening courses there. And we have aboutlearning.com, which is
Mm-hmm.
our website here. And then in Australia, we have the Australian website. And
Right.
in Denmark and Norway and
Mm-hmm.
Sweden, there's another website
Mm-hmm.
where people like you, who are our master trainers, are, and those things are available. And I just got, isn't it interesting? This morning,
Mm-hmm.
when I opened my phone, there was a message from China
Oh.
where my book, Traveling the Format Cycle, has just come off the press. And
Oh.
yeah, they wanted me to know that they had 3,000 copies that were
Mm-hmm.
now available and on sale in China.
Mm-hmm.
And we're thrilled about that, of course. And they're sending me a copy of what my book looks like in Chinese. So it'll be interesting to see what the cover, well, how they did the cover, what the artwork they put on the front.
Right.
Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's really exciting, and I'm overwhelmed that this could have ever happened, that it would have
Yeah.
gone out to you in Indonesia or to the Korea or into Europe or into Australia. It's just amazing to me.
Yeah, I would say it format has been not only a formula, but it has been a legacy. I think I would say that it's been a great legacy from you. So, Dr. McCarthy, again, that if the people would like to know more about format officially, they can come to format.org. And as you say, the four is actually in numbers, mat.org. And also they can visit the aboutlearning.com as your website.
Where
So,
all the books, yeah, where the
yeah.
books are all listed on,
Ah,
uh,
right.
yeah, right.
Yeah, right. So before we close this podcast, Dr. McCarty, what will be the closing speech or any call to action that you can remind us as the viewer, as the audience of this podcast? Anything. It can be about learning, it can be about life, or it can be about anything. What will be the closing statement that you will use as a closing for this podcast?
Well, there are a lot of my
Mm-hmm.
friends are retiring,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll say, sometimes they'll say,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what I'm going to do when I retire. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
astonished by that.
Uh-huh.
When the world is so full of
Right.
wonderful things, there's
Uh-huh.
so much to learn everywhere you turn. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's something wonderful and beautiful and exciting and that you know nothing at all about. So
Yeah.
to me, I find that unbelievable that anyone would say, I don't know what I'm going to do when I retire. So I guess my last parting words
Uh-huh.
would be always go for the more,
Always
the
go for the more.
for the more, for
Yeah.
the exciting, more puzzles, more. Imagine that. You know,
Hmm.
I have the new website on my phone, the Hubble, and then the new one that came,
Hmm.
and it's looking at the stars and the firmament as it was 13 billion years ago.
Right.
Um, and I picked one of them out and used them on my computer as my
Hmm.
web page
Yeah.
back. And to me, my advice is to find a way to constantly be open to the next why in your life
Oh, yeah.
and to
Yeah.
find people to share that with.
Hmm.
Just read a book yourself. Find a person or some group of people to share that with yourself so
Right.
that their perceptions and your perceptions become something new.
Uh-huh.
In other words, if you and I read a book together and we talked about it, my feeling of it and your feeling of it would create in us a new something because I would be learning your perceptions, you'd be learning mine, and there'd be a third
Right.
new more, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Yeah. It
that's
creates a
that's
more whole
what
understanding.
learning is. Yes.
Right. So
Oh, I'm
thanks, Dr.
honored
McCarthy. Mm-hmm.
I'm honored to have been asked to work with you, Bob. Your people. No, I really am. Um,
Mm. Thanks
thank you
for the
so
honor, Dr. McCarthy. It's really been a great journey with you under your personal guidance and also a lot of discussion that we had and also in this podcast where you share your wisdom to our audience here in Indonesia. So I, or perhaps I will say we, would like to extend again our gratitude for this moment, for this honor, and thanks for everything. So we're gonna close the podcast now. Once again, thank you and
my
see
pleasure.
you
Yes.
again.
Thank you.
Itulah dia sekilas pembicaraan saya bersama Dr. McCarthy di interview podcast yang baru saja kami lakukan. Menarik bukan? Sebagaimana Anda juga mungkin mendapati kesan spontan saya di video itu, ada begitu banyak jawaban yang mendalam yang saya dapati dari apa yang beliau artikulasikan di pembicaraan kami. Sebagaimana Anda juga sudah mendengar dari penjelasan beliau, kalau Anda merasa tertarik untuk mendapatkan informasi lebih jauh tentang format sistem dan perkembangannya, silakan menemukannya di link www.format.org. Silakan temukan link tersebut di kolom deskripsi video YouTube ini. Kalau Anda adalah seseorang yang bergerak di bidang pelatihan, pembelajaran, pendidikan, yang merasa tertarik untuk ikut mendalami format sistem ini untuk mendesain pembelajaran yang Anda fasilitasi dalam bahasa Indonesia, silakan temukan informasinya di website saya www.alguskha.com. Untuk saat ini, kita cukupkan dulu episode kali ini sampai di sini. Sampai jumpa lagi di episode-episode lainnya bersama narasumber lain.